Hi, I'm Mumma Isabel, and welcome to Storytime. Tonight's story is called William and the Tiniest Dragon. William didn't believe anything he was told. He was a boy who always had to see for himself. He was also a pretty clever boy. Even when he was a toddler, he realised that grown-ups say some pretty silly things to children. When his mother wanted him to eat his dinner, she used to play games. William thought that was very silly. "Here comes the big orange plane," his mum would coo. "Coming in to land at Mouth Airport." And then she would swoop a large spoonful of carrots towards his mouth. William would look at her with a big frown. "It isn't," he would say, and then shut his mouth firmly. When William tried out his new plastic hammer on Mr. Bear's nose, his father tried to stop him. "Oh, William, you're hurting poor Mr. Bear," Dad said. "He'll be upset." "He isn't alive, you know," said William coldly. When William was older, things became even more difficult. He got into lots of trouble at Grandma's birthday party. Grandma giggled and told everyone that she was 39. When William said, "You've got to be joking," in a very loud voice, Grandma got rather upset, and William was sent to his room. William's teacher thought he was hard work. He always wanted her to prove anything she said. Sometimes that could be difficult. "The moon is very different from Earth," said Mrs. Martin. "Nobody lives there, and nothing grows there." All the children in the class wrote what she said in their books, all except William. "How do you know there's nothing growing on the moon?" said William. "Have you ever been there?" "No, of course not," replied the teacher. "But other people have. Their reports say that there is nothing at all growing on the moon, so that's how we know." "Well, people don't often tell the truth," said William. "How do you know you can trust them?" "You'll just have to take my word for it, William," Mrs. Martin replied. "Now we must move on." She knew that William's questions could take up the whole lesson. It was very difficult. There were not many subjects that William felt happy about. Maths was fine. He could work out all the problems and see for himself that everything was true. He could prove it. Music was okay too. He could hear with his own ears if something wasn't right. History, on the other hand, was very difficult. How could he be sure that the history books were telling the truth? How could anyone know for certain what happened hundreds of years ago? Geography was just as bad. How could he be sure that the maps were right? How did anyone know what the centre of the earth was really like? William found it all very annoying, and William's teacher found his questions very annoying too. Then one day, Mrs. Martin had a brainwave. She told William all about evidence. "You see, William," she said, "if we aren't sure that something is true, we can use evidence to check it. Evidence can be drawings or photographs. It can be birth certificates or videos." Well, after that, William began to enjoy the idea of using real things to show what was true. He was very upset when Grandma refused to show him her birth certificate. "It's for evidence," cried William. "I needed to back up my family history project." But she said no. Grandad was much more helpful. He let William borrow his birth certificate and take it to school. "Of course, he is much older than me," said Grandma. But the subject that William found most difficult of all was English. Again and again, Mrs. Martin asked him to make up a story about something. But William didn't understand why he should write something that wasn't true. "What's the point?" he asked. It helps your imagination to grow, sighed Mrs. Martin. I'm sure you make up lots of wonderful stories in your head, William. We just want to hear some of them. I don't make up any stories in my head, replied William. Why would I want to do that? It wouldn't be true. You can't trust made-up things. Well, in a way you're right, replied his teacher. You don't have to believe them, but you can enjoy them. And sometimes they're true in other ways. If you read a story about a boy being afraid of a ghost, it doesn't mean that there really are ghosts. It doesn't mean that there really was a boy who was afraid of them. But it does mean that people are often afraid of things they don't really understand. And that's true, even if the story isn't. Do you see? But William didn't see it at all. I'll write a diary instead, he said. It will be a sort of story, but it will be true. Mrs. Martin sighed and agreed. She thought a diary was better than nothing. One day, Mrs. Martin said that she had something exciting to tell the class. Starting today, you are going to stop writing lots of different stories, she said. Instead, each of you is going to write one long story, like a chapter book. You will write a chapter each week. At the end of the term, a famous author is going to come and read the books. She will give prizes for the most imaginative stories. All the children were very excited. All except one, of course. William was frowning. I don't know why I bother, he said. Mine isn't going to be imaginative at all. I'm going to keep writing my diary. Well, if that is what you feel happy doing, that will be fine, said Mrs. Martin. But it didn't make her feel happy. She had read dozens and dozens of William's stories. All of them were written like a diary. And all of them were very, very boring. Today I got up at 7:30. I had a cup of tea. Then I had cereal and an orange for breakfast. It was raining when I set off for school, so I wore my raincoat. I looked at my rain counter and saw that 2 centimetres of rain had fallen overnight. I told Mrs. Martin at school, but she didn't seem very interested. James Jones stole my pencil. We had cheese and salad and apple pie for lunch. I got A+ for my maths homework. It was still raining when I went home. Mrs. Martin thought of having to read a whole book full of this kind of thing and sighed. She did not like that thought at all. But it looked as if that was what she would have to do. William would only write about things he knew were true. And that was the end of it. But William's life was about to change in the most amazing way. That evening, after he had eaten his dinner and recorded every mouthful in his new story diary, William sat down at the desk in his room to do his homework. It was maths, which he liked. He was doing a difficult sum about how long it would take 3 men to dig 5 holes. It was a very interesting problem. So at first, he didn't notice the little puff of smoke coming from his pencil case. When he saw the smoke, William looked down at his pencil case in horror. He had learnt about fire safety in school. His pencils must be on fire. He knew he shouldn't open the zip in case the fire spread. William ran into the bathroom, filled a glass with water, ran back to his room and threw it over the pencil case. Well, he remembered to move his maths homework out of the way first. The smoke stopped at once. But then something even odder happened. The pencil's case started to cough. William watched it in amazement. The pencil case gave a little jump with each cough. William thought as fast as he could. but he could only think of one reason for his pencil case to be jumping up and down. There must be something very small inside it. William felt sure that there must be a mouse inside his pencil case. He had never seen a mouse at school, but he knew that they liked living under the floorboards in old buildings. William's school was a very old building, and it had lots of floorboards. A mouse could have crept in the school and been chewing at his pencils ever since. Maybe it wasn't smoke he had seen. Maybe it was puffs of sawdust or something like that. William didn't like the idea of a mouse running about in his bedroom. So he picked up the dripping pencil case and carefully carried it into the bathroom. He shut the door firmly and locked it, and put the jumping pencil case down in the basin. Then, very, very slowly, he pulled back the zip. What he saw next was about the same size as a mouse, but it wasn't a mouse. William knew that mice are not green and orange with wings. He thought it must be a bat. It had to be some kind of fruit-eating bat from a tropical country. William decided to go back to his room and look up the creature on Google. But just at that moment, the animal gave a final cough, and little puffs of white smoke started coming out of its nose. William's mind was racing. He could remember a lesson from school about animals called salamanders and a story that they live in fires. But salamanders didn't have wings, like this creature. And anyway, that was just a story. It wasn't true. It was because salamanders often live in dead logs, and when the logs are thrown onto a fire, the salamanders run out. This little animal wasn't running anywhere. It looked perfectly happy. William hurried out of the bathroom and shut the door carefully behind him. He rushed to his room and found his magnifying glass. When he was back in the bathroom, he looked at the creature again. This time he was going to be scientific. There must be a way to find out what it was. It was a long time before William couldn't believe what his eyes were telling him. When he used the magnifying glass, he could see that it wasn't only smoke that was coming from the creature's nostrils. There were tiny flames as well. He could see that its green and orange skin was made up of tiny scales. He could see that it had a long tail with a forked bit at the end. He could see that the tiny animal sitting quietly in the basin was not a mouse. It was not a fruit bat. It was not a salamander. It was a dragon. You know, and I know, and William knew, that dragons are not real, in the way that cows and pigs are real. Dragons are imaginary, like fairies and goblins and unicorns. You can only find them in storybooks. But William also knew that one of these storybook creatures was sitting in his bathroom basin. He needed to do some serious thinking, and fast. You or I might have been puzzled about the whole thing. So puzzled that our brains refused to take in what we were seeing. So puzzled that we couldn't think slowly and sensibly about it afterwards. But, as you know, William was a pretty clever boy. After a couple of minutes of hard thinking, he found that it was all very simple. How did he know that there were no such things as dragons? He knew because books and teachers had told him so. Did he believe everything that he read in books or was told by teachers? No. Did he believe things he could see to be true with his own eyes? Definitely. There was no question about it. That was a tiny dragon in his bathroom. That was real evidence. It proved that there are such things as dragons in real life. The only problem now was deciding what to do next. Oh, wish I knew what dragons like to eat, said William. He always talked out loud when he had a problem to solve. At least I think the big dragons like to eat people. But what could this one manage? He peered again at the creature. Said the dragon, with its mouth full. It was very hungry. So it had answered the question itself by tucking into the soap. William was not sure that soap was a very good meal for anyone, dragon or human, but the dragon seemed perfectly happy. Half a bar of soap disappeared into its tiny mouth. Then it sat down and made what sounded like a burp. William thought that the creature must now be thirsty. He knew that he would be very thirsty if he had just eaten half a bar of soap. So he turned on the cold tap, and just a little trickle of water came out of it. But at once a tiny screeching came from the basin. The dragon started to jump about, trying to keep away from the water. William bent down. It wasn't screeching. The dragon was talking, but in a very, very tiny voice. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" the dragon was squeaking. "Don't you know anything? Turn it off!" William did what he was told. Then he leant down again and asked, "Why?" "Dragons hate water," squealed the dragon. "It puts out our flames, and they're so difficult to light again. And that reminds me." "Oh?" William knew what the dragon was going to say. "I'm sorry about throwing the water over you earlier. I thought my pencil case was on fire." "That was pretty silly," said the dragon. "What on earth made you think that?" "The smoke," said William crossly. He didn't like being told he was silly by a creature that was not much bigger than his nose. "Your smoke," he added. "Ah, well, I suppose I can see your point," said the dragon. "That could have been the reason for the smoke. But didn't you even think that it might have been a dragon?" "Of course not," replied William. "I didn't know that there were such things as dragons." "Didn't know?" cried the dragon. "But I know for a fact that there are dozens of children's stories with dragons in them. How could you possibly not know? Can't you read?" "Of course I can." William was getting even crosser now. "But those stories are made up. The things in them aren't true, you know." "Really?" The dragon laughed. "So, how do you explain me then?" William couldn't. The dragon stayed with William for almost 2 months. He never showed himself when anyone else was around. But when William was alone, the dragon came out. They had long conversations. The dragon told William all about what it was like to be a dragon. He described how it felt to fly so high up in the sky that Earth looked like a blue and green dot. William heard how dragons meet once a year on the high, cold mountains and start fires to keep themselves warm. He found out what dragons dream about. He listened to the strange, roaring, hissing songs that dragons sing when they are together. His new friend told him how much fun it was to be a dragon. He explained how dragons stay hidden from human beings. He told him all about chasing eagles through the blue sky and burning their tail feathers off. "Eagles always think they know it all," laughed the dragon. "Sometimes you have to teach them a lesson." He told William the stories that dragons tell each other on a cold winter night. Funny stories about stupid human beings who get eaten up. Scary stories about fierce dragon slayers. Exciting stories about treasure caves full of gold and silver. And William wrote down every word of these conversations in his diary. Those 2 months changed William's life. He had to think again about lots of things, such as whether you could believe what you read in books, and what it really meant to say that something was true. He started to notice things he had never noticed before. He saw the way that clouds sometimes look like dragons. He noticed that there seemed to be a man smiling in the moon. He knew that the clouds weren't dragons and that there wasn't really a man in the moon. But he started to understand that it could be fun to think about things that only seemed to be true. His family, his teachers, and his friends thought that he was much, much easier to be around. He liked them better too. At the end of the term, the famous author came into school and chose the best stories. She chose William's diary as the story showing the most imagination. He was amazed. He couldn't tell Mrs. Martin that every word of it was true. He was even more amazed when he saw how happy everyone else was for him. It felt really good. He liked it so much. He didn't notice that the dragon had gone completely. William searched for the dragon for a long time. He even searched in those places you'd rather not look, like the darker corners of the bathroom and inside his brother's shoes. But there was no sign of the dragon. Sometimes William felt sure that out of the corner of his eye he could see little flickering flames and puffs of smoke. But however fast he turned around, they were never really there. The dragon had disappeared forever. But William knew he would never forget the wonderful things it had taught him. And on cold, frosty mornings, when his breath looked like little puffs of smoke, he wore a secret smile. And that's the end of our story tonight. This story was featured in the book Stories for 7-Year-Olds. It was written by Nicola Baxter, Moira Butterfield, Marcel Feigel, Jan and Tony Payne. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. If you enjoyed our story, don't forget to hit that thumbs up like down the bottom. Share with your friends if you think they might also enjoy our wonderful story. And hit that subscribe button so that you will be up to date when our new stories are released.